united we strike. U-N-I-T-E-D-W-E. Strike! U-N-I-T-E-D-W-E. Strike! I'm alright with united we strike. Stand in line with united we strike. Join the fight with united we strike. We need the millions of working class heroes who've had enough of being less than zero. All together right with united we strike. Don't fight, don't fight,
Join UnitedWeStrike.com radio on the second Saturday of every month for our live international radio marathon. Don't buy, don't comply, ask why.
Okay, you're listening to the United We Strike Radio Marathon on June 14th, 2014. Our next guest is Dr. Rima and her guests. And as usual, we have fantastic information from Dr. Rima. She's been on our show on Open Your Mind Radio over in Ireland, and we're working on a project together which we're staying in touch with, and we're hopefully going to get some results with that. But okay, Dr. Rima, over to you. I'll pass it off to you and we'll talk to you at the end.
Thank you so much. Welcome to Tell the Truth with Dr. Rima. It's all about truth, isn't it? I'm Rima Laibow, MD. I am the medical director of the Natural Solutions Foundation, the largest health freedom organization in the world. Our principal website is www.drrima, R-I-M-A, truthreports.com, drrimatruthreports.com. Go there, sign up for the free newsletter. You need the information and we need your voice. With me today, I have enormous pleasure in introducing you to, first, my co-trustee and the co-host of our 2-hour radio show called, not surprisingly, the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. We'll tell you when and where you can listen to that and how to get the archives of that very, very informative show. Ralph Fusatola, JD, who is the counsel to the Natural Solutions Foundation and a true health freedom hero who uses his legal skills and cleverness to help keep us free. And it's a huge battle, which we only win when all of us work together. Welcome, Ralph.
Thank you, Dr. Rima, for having me on, I guess, the inaugural episode of your new Saturday show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. You and I have a long history of working together in live radio and in lots of other ways. Let me get right to our guests. We have Joe Jessen, who is a specialist in measurement. He measures things. He meters things. He figures out how to determine how much of things we have and whether we should have more or less of them, including, very, very importantly for today's discussion, radiation. Hello, Joe.
Are you with us, Joe Jessen?
I think Joe may have muted his microphone. Hello, Joe. I hope he's there. Well, while we're trying to
Yes, the computer's trying to get him back.
Yes, good. While we are trying to get Joe Jessen back, let me introduce you to Professor Tony Piera, who is a professor of environmental sciences at the University of Texas, Beaumont. And unlike some people who write about and care about sustainability as a code word for depopulation and enslavement, Dr. Tony is actually one of the good guys. He's on our side, believing that there is enough earth, there is enough energy, there is enough water, there is enough air for us all if we manage the earth and our participation in the biosphere well. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rima. Small correction in there. My assignment with that university in Beaumont is finished, but I have good news. I'm a Fulbright scholar, which is quite a privilege.
Well, congratulations!
Congratulations!
And it's thank you very much. It's a merit-based, it's competition-based, and he has had scholars and notable men. He has the most Nobel Prizes in the world, about 50 of any organization, and it has had notable men. President Carter was among them. President Mandela was a Fulbright scholar. It's a bilateral treaty contract between two nations. About 150 nations on the planet, about 3/4 of all the nations on the planet, have bilateral agreements with us, with the United States, and it was a brilliant idea of a senator, Senator Fulbright, just after the war, that he said he thought to himself and spoke out loud in the Senate. Well, we have all of this equipment. The war now is finished. And we have all of this equipment that is surplus now because we don't have a war anymore. What are we going to do with it? And he proposed that to sell that equipment in order to finance and education and bilateral agreements with other nations to foster and further science and education and political study and between nations.
Dr. Tony, what will you, congratulations, what will you be doing and where will you be doing it during your tenure as a Fulbright scholar?
I'll be doing research with the university in Europe, one of the oldest universities in Europe that is about 900 years old. So it's much, much older than our country and
which
any
university?
others. It's a university in Italy.
Which one?
It's the University of Palermo.
Oh, how lovely! How lovely. Well, that's not exactly hardship.
Do you know that university? It's one of the.
The Italians formed the very first universities.
They did. Yes, they did.
Really.
Well, I'm hoping, by the way, to get Joe Jessen back. I've called him back several times. We're having a little bit of a connection problem, so I'm hoping he'll join us. Let us talk a bit about sustainability and about nuclear power and nuclear leakage into the environment. You focus on sustainability and sustainable energy. You focus very heavily on solar energy solutions. Let people know, first of all, that I have just published a new very important report within the last couple of days on the fact that the EPA has been hiding the true situation in terms of the radiation levels that people in the United States are experiencing. And we'll talk in detail about precisely how they've been hiding it and what they've been hiding. But the background, and Ralph, maybe before we go ahead, maybe you can give people the link that they can go to so they can get this new very, very important report.
Absolutely. It is one of those. Fire. That's tinyurl.com/Fukushima fire.
Now, there are two ebooks available there. One by the president of our foundation, General Burt. It's an update of the recent situation in Fukushima. And then my new report, which talks about the fact that we now have graphic proof that the EPA has been lying through its teeth and altering the data to convince us that there is no harm to human health from radiation, when in fact we have all, or almost all of us in the United States, been exposed for at least the past 4 years. That takes us a year before Fukushima to levels of radiation so great that most cities in the United States are well above the internationally agreed upon radiation evacuation level. Now, I asked Dr. Tony to talk to us about nuclear power and radiation contamination, and then I kept on talking, so I'll stop. Dr. Tony, please go ahead.
Well, it's since the first atomic explosion, we have conducted. I forgot the number, but I saw the number several times. Was it hundreds? Maybe
thousands.
Thousands.
Yeah. There's a
not just in. Thank you, Ralph. Not just in our country, but around the world. The Soviets, the former Soviet Union, did that, and then several other countries that France and the UK, I think they exploded a few as well. And that has released enormous amounts of not just radiation, but radionuclides that most of them do not exist in a natural state in the world, but they exist because they were fabricated during the explosion of the nuclear bomb, during the nuclear blast. And some of those bombs were really big indeed, tens, dozens of times more powerful than what it was exploded in Fukushima, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, just before the end of the war. Here, our explosions were done first in the air in Nevada and Arizona, and then they were subterranean, and then done in the atolls in the Pacific, in the small islands of the Pacific, just obliterating them. Then someone came in and said, well, let's use the atom for peace and to generate energy. And there was this line that was circulated that atomic energy will be so cheap that we won't be able to meter it. So less than a cent for a kilowatt hour, or even less than that. And that immediately the American public and the rest of the world was sold on that idea that we would have enough energy to power our society forever. Back in the early 2000s, I advised a colleague at UCLA I had already organized some of the very first Earth Day in my department in 40 years. Nobody had done it. And then a colleague organized the Earth Day lecture in Earth Sciences in our department, and asked me for who she had a little money and who should she invite to come for a talk. And I mentioned Dr. David Goodstein from Caltech, which was the provost at the time, and also the professor of physics, distinguished professor of physics. So he gave a talk, and he wrote the calculations. He did the calculations that if we were going to power all of our civilization with nuclear energy, we would need about 20,000 reactors. Well, we have about 400 right now, and took all this time and materials to build them. So to build from 400 to 20,000 is a 50-fold increase in materials, in planning, in political and economical dealings, and going back and forth, and the industrial vamp up and revamp. So quite an enormous challenge. But there is more to the story, because if we were going to use, suppose we could build them instantly, which is impossible to do. These commissions are large in terms of metals, steel, and cement and concrete, and all of that uses steel, more steel. So in order to meet those requirements, and of course uranium. Now uranium needs to be mined, needs to be refined, needs to be transported, and then it needs to be installed on the reactor.
I hope that's Joe Jessen calling Ralph.
I'm on.
Oh, you
Reba.
are. Oh, excellent. Thank you. I'm so sorry we lost you, but folks, we've got Joe Jessen. Dr. Tony was just talking about some of the history of nuclear reasoning, if you can call it that. So please go ahead, Dr. Tony.
I'll finish and give anybody else the opportunity to speak as well. The amount of uranium, the most that we can get in the best sites, about 1% per ton. So very, very, very small amounts. 1 gram per ton. If we were going to build 20,000 reactors instantly in order to provide all the energy that we currently need, not even taking account to the needs of the future and the growth of society, then we would deplete all of the reserves, uranium reserves around the world, not just in our country, around the world, in a decade, the most 2 decades, but not longer than that. So that's the lie that we have been told, that in addition there are the problems that we have seen, not just one time, not just 2 times, but now 3 times with Fukushima, that the reactors are safe. They're not. I'm an engineer. I know materials. I know engineering very, very, very well. I teach those. And once materials are subject to pressure, temperature, stress, and forces, and in addition, they are subject to neutron bombardment and nuclear exposure, then we have at least five variables in there. There are the first 4 we understand very well, but when radiation comes into account, then it becomes, at those pressures and temperatures, it becomes very, very difficult to deal with. In addition, building 4 reactors, 6 reactions right nested, right to each other, as it is the case in Fukushima, and this is in the case in almost every single nuclear plant in the world, is the dumbest thing that any engineer could do, because if one breaks, then there is no way that to get to the other reactors, and they become immediately exposed, even if nothing happens to them, because the radiation levels are so big that just very, very short exposures, like in Chernobyl, that they were allowed to go for 60 seconds, and most of those poor guys, they died in the first attempts to cover the reactor with bags of sand. So this is the lunacy and the insanity that we are all of the population is exposed to.
Now, let me make it clear, and we have 2 engineers on the show, Joe Jessen and Professor Tony Piera, now a Fulbright scholar. Very, very exciting. Let me make it clear that
it's easier. Rima, I don't mean to interrupt you. It's easier to pronounce Dr. Tony. So
Dr. Tony. Yeah. Let me make it clear that to this day, there is still no safe, effective, efficient, and permanent disposal process for nuclear waste. Let me make it clear that the most advanced nuclear waste disposal facilities are very fragile. For instance, the WIPP disposal facility or internment facility in New Mexico had casks of plutonium enriched nuclear waste from Los Alamos nuclear facility, and they're stored in barrels which are damped, which are topped with, I kid you not, kitty litter. And the kitty litter has materials in the clay that quenches some of the radiation. However, some idiot decided that organic kitty litter would be better and put in non-clay kitty litter, and those barrels are now burning and exploding, and the amount of plutonium and other radionuclides being released is unknown and incalculable right in the United States. There you have a Fukushima in the United States that, of course, the press is currently ignoring. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Joe Jessen to talk to us about measuring radiation, and then we'll tell you about the fact that we have discovered, the proof that if you live in one of the large population centers of the United States, or a great many of the small ones, you probably are living in an area that is so heavily contaminated that you are well above the EPA's evacuation level and have been for years. Joe, welcome back to the show. We were having some Skype difficulties, but we've got you now, and I'm very excited about that, to have you. Talk to us about measuring radiation and what happens when you try to measure radiation with the wrong Geiger counter. What is gamma? What is alpha? What is beta? What are neutrons? And what are we looking at here?
Oh, thanks, Dr. Rima, for inviting me. I've got some interesting news today also. But measurement, I'm going to back up a little bit because I would like to get everyone to understand why measuring as citizens, why we want to measure radiation and why this is important to keep an eye on the government numbers and the publicized numbers, because and I know you'll go into details about the findings, but leading up to the discussion and the partial test ban treaty of 1963, you've seen a massive amount of test explosions, nuclear test explosions, where they've unleashed 58 megatons of the Tsar bomb out of Russia, and 54 was of course the Bikini Atoll 15 megaton explosion. So if you want to measure, why measuring is so important is if you look at a chart of carbon-14, and carbon-14 basically is taken up into the cells via photosynthesis and makes its way up through the food chain, basically. And it enters animal cells through the DNA through mitosis. But the point is if you look at a graph, if you just graph carbon-14 level, just the ambient carbon-14 level, you see an incredible spike. It comes out at a very low level in 1955, but when the pressure is on to ban above ground nuclear weapons, and every government, you see Russia, you see USA, people that had the bombs, basically were in a mad rush just to launch their 50 megaton bomb. So you see a spike, you see a huge spike over on C4 carbon-14 in about 1963 when they actually implemented the partial test ban treaty. And after that, you see a decrease. And then comes Chernobyl, and one important fact people should know about Chernobyl: this was not told to us by the Russian government. I mean, this was discovered by scientists outside of Russia when they looked at the ambient level of radiation and said, "Wait a minute, something is really wrong here. We see a dramatic spike in carbon-14 and other cesium products." So we had a problem, basically, and the Finnish scientists were the ones, I believe, that first identified the Chernobyl event. But throughout at all the events, and then initially in Fukushima, you see an overt attempt, basically, by the government to cover up the actual impact of the explosion. And so this is what got my attention. I mean, it's well documented that Fukushima was the government completely covered up the magnitude of the event and the actual measuring of the background radiation and the ongoing continuous leakage of radiation into the ocean. So these numbers were covered up. But the good news is that you had quite a few citizen scientists that built their own radiation measurement equipment. And they put it on they sent the data to a international portal based in London called Patch Bay, now called Lively. But so you have multiple sensors that the citizen scientists themselves are sending radiation sensing data, and they're using simple radiation instruments like the Geiger counter, the GM tube approach. So basically that kind of leads into what my interest is, and that is to really understand the effects and the origin of the radiation spikes that we're seeing in this country and around the world, because we're not going to learn it through governments. And in fact, let me just say briefly before I give the floor back to Dr. Rima, whenever there's an incident in this country, in the U.S., there's a secret team called NEST that they fly together, they meet, and then they go investigate any documented or any rumors of an incident. There's a team called NEST that fly in and get together and go on location with instruments known as isotope detection equipment or scintillation detectors. So what they come in with is, and so for example, if Homeland Security sees a potential incident coming in, and the New York and all the ports now have radiation sensors tied, gamma radiation sensors tied to the tugboats and the ports, and also the tunnels feeding Manhattan, for example. There's radiation sensors. So, but they're very crude. All it can tell you is that initially that they're sensing a high burst of gamma. So they know there's a gamma emitter, but they don't know what the root cause is. What is the actual isotope that's the emitter of radiation? So what they do right now, Homeland Security, for example, has some very expensive sensors that they bring in whenever there's a peak of gamma, called a scintillation detector, and then that actually identifies the isotope. And so to make a long story short, when NEST gets involved, they don't publicize their results, they don't publicize when they get together, and there's no information on what is the trigger that pulls NEST together to go on site to investigate a potential incident. I'll give the floor back to Dr. Rima.
Well, this is most important. First of all, what you're saying is that if there is a radionuclide leak, if there is a danger to human health, the government will investigate and the government will keep the results secret. And this
Correct.
is of enormous importance to you. If you are still of the delusional belief that you can trust the government, and this could be the U.S. government, it could be the Japanese government, any government, to tell you the truth about a nuclear event and tell you whether or not there is in fact a harm to human health involved, well, you need your meds adjusted because you're delusional. Governments are incredibly closely tied to the nuclear industry, and the nuclear industry needs you to believe that there is no harm to human health and that nuclear power, nuclear reactors, nuclear bombs, nuclear subs, etc., are safe, and we should just rely on the pronouncements of the official persons who tell us they're safe. And this is quite literally delusional. So, Joe is saying, if you have a Geiger counter, it may not be this fancy-dancy scintillation counter thing, but you will see the general trend. You may not
Indeed,
be able
Dr. Rima, I am turning on my Geiger counter right now, the one that we've been using for the past several years, and I'll let you know what the reading is in a couple of moments.
Excellent. I have, by the way, I'll get to this in a moment, the Natural Solutions Foundation had a very sophisticated Geiger counter donated to it by FLIR. It's called an identifinder, and it will identify specific radioisotopes, which is quite wonderful. But you don't have to have an $18,000 Geiger counter donated to you or purchased. A simple Geiger counter will give you information that will show you a trend. And Joe is talking about why you need it. The reason that you need it is you cannot believe the U.S. government, the Japanese government, or any other government, because their nuclear industry is controlled by, their nuclear regulation is controlled by the nuclear industry in the same way that our food industry is controlled. Our food regulation is controlled by the food industry. Our drug regulation is controlled by the drug industry. Now, having said that, do we face a nuclear problem? Well, at this point, let's go to the report, the special report that the Natural Solutions Foundation has just put out. In that report, we talk about the fact that the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has a level at which they say the population should be evacuated because the radiation hazard is too great for people to stay where they are. And that level is pretty much the internationally agreed upon level, which is way too high, by the way. That level is 20 thousandths of a sievert per year, or 20 millisieverts per year. Now, you don't have to know what a sievert is and how it's derived and how it relates to other measurement systems to understand that that number translates to about 272 or 273 counts per minute of a radiation detector that's using cesium-137 as its source. Don't worry about that part. Just remember the number 272 counts per minute. Now, if the detectors are picking up more than 272 counts per minute, according to the EPA's latest document on this subject, that's the point at which a population needs to be evacuated. That means you should leave your home, and maybe you'll come back to your home someday, but probably not. That's a pretty serious situation, and it means that the nuclear contamination is absolutely out of control. So are there any places in the United States where the EPA, which claimed for several years following Fukushima not to be monitoring radiation, not to be monitoring food, not to be monitoring water, not to be monitoring other or ambient radiation in the air. And of course, they hadn't turned off their detectors at all. They just weren't making the data particularly public. It turns out when you find those data, and they have been monitoring it, many cities in the United States are actually above the evacuation level, and they have been above the evacuation level for, are you ready for this? Not just since Fukushima, but for at least 4 years, because the data set that I found shows data for the last 4 years. And during that time, Hartford, Connecticut, for example, has been well above 272. Fresno, California, well above 272. Miami, Florida, has been above 400 for that entire period and is rising steadily. This is gamma radiation that we're talking about, for those of you who want that specific information. And that's bad enough. That's pretty bad. As Dr. Tony will tell us, as Joe will tell us, as I will tell you as a physician, this is not healthy. We're talking about increases in cancer. We're talking about increases in infertility and sterility, increases in birth defects, increases in heart disease. This is bad news. Well, it gets worse. The EPA also measures, it turns out, not surprisingly, other types of radiation. Remember, we said there was alpha, there was beta, and there was gamma radiation that we're talking about. We're not talking about other classes of measurement right now, just alpha, beta, gamma. That'll do fine. Now, beta is associated very specifically, beta radiation, with increased cancer. Gamma radiation is associated with diabetes and many other things as well, but the principal health effect that beta has is primarily an increase in cancer of various tissues, depending on where the item that is emitting the beta settles. Okay, so we're talking about an increase in cancer, and we all know about the tremendous increase in cancer rates in the United States that's been going on for quite some time. Well, turns out that in those cities, and I've made the charts that show this data available in this special report, in those cities in which the evacuation level of 272 has been surpassed for most or all of the last 4 years, in those areas, in those cities, the beta data, the charts showing the beta, have a flat line surrounding the time of Fukushima. In those cities where the evacuation levels have not been surpassed, the beta data show the data from about December 2010 to about February 2012. Now, you will recall that Fukushima took place on March 11th, 2011. So for about 15 months before, during, and after the Fukushima, the first Fukushima crisis, because there have been continuing crises, during that time, amazingly enough, the beta data for cities that should be under evacuation, the beta data is absent, totally and completely, flatline, gone, absent. But for those cities where the beta data, where the city has not reached evacuation levels, the beta data is completely intact. Now, that's extraordinary. What that says is that not only is it okay for the EPA and the other nuclear and regulatory agencies to lie to you, not only is that okay, but they think that you are incredibly stupid, that you won't notice, A, the dropout of data, and B, the fact that there's a pattern to the dropout of data. Well, you're not that stupid, and neither am I, and we noticed it very clearly this week. I checked with these two gentlemen who are on our show, Joe Jessen and Professor Tony Piera, and I said, am I getting something wrong here? Is this possible? This is horrendous. And then when they said, no, you're doing the calculations right, and this does seem to be the situation, then the Natural Solutions Foundation went public with this data. So that's the background. To recap, because it might be a little bit difficult to follow, and Ralph will give the link. The data on beta emissions, beta contamination and exposure that's linked with cancer, for those cities that have been above the evacuation level set by the EPA for the last 4 years, that Fukushima data is missing. For those cities that are not above the evacuation level, the data is intact. Very dramatic. Ralph, would you give the link where people can get this special report? And by the way, it is free. This is a public service.
Yes, Dr. It's one of our tiny URLs, tinyurl.com/Fukushima fire. That's Fukushima fire, one run-on word. tinyurl.com/Fukushima fire. Now, Dr. Rima, I've had my Geiger counter on, and let's see what type of reading we get here. I've got an average of 0.110 microsieverts per hour. Now, it was peaking up as high as the maximum was 170 that I saw, and so then this is 0.110, a little over a tenth of a microsievert.
And I'm going to get out my calculator.
Good. And let me while you're getting your calculator out, I'm going to quickly recap the readings I've had over the past several years, because we obtained the Geiger counters a couple of months after the Fukushima event, and we noticed Dr. Rima had one in the Deep South in Chile. I had one up here in New Jersey, and the readings in the Deep South were about 0.04, 4/100ths of a millisievert, and the readings up here in New Jersey were about 0.09 rather, millisieverts. So we were about twice as hot, a little more than twice as hot as the Deep South at that point. Over the past 2 years, I've watched the average slowly working its way up. As I said, it's now at 0.110 on this particular day. During the heavy snowstorms of this winter, the readings were a bit higher, and we actually, on one of the Dr. Rima Truth Report programs, we worked on those issues and looked at a reading of inside this room versus a reading of on top of the snowbank, and it was actually hotter out in the snow. And we've also noticed that the whole house filter, the HEPA filter on the whole house fan, will read much higher than the background, but it's been slowly going up, and a 20% increase since the time of Fukushima. But there was an initial increase. We have to assume that the North and the South were approximately equal in radiation levels by the time of Fukushima, because it had been decades since the last nuclear tests. Those nuclear tests are scattered around the world. There's an amazing YouTube video where someone took 50 years of nuclear testing and put it on a map. Over 5 minutes, you get a beep and a little point of light. And it gets faster and more intense in several waves, as Dr. Tony described. And it's an astounding video. You really get the feeling of what's been done. Nuclear testing was a form of geoengineering. The existence of nuclear power plants, especially those that are along rivers and fault lines, and coasts, is a type of geoengineering, and so that's what we're seeing. We've seen this gradual increase. Now, this is just one Geiger counter in one room in Northwest New Jersey. These networks that we've been talking about, the one network, NETC.com, is where some of these readings are from. There are other networks. There's the radiation network that the company that sells some of the Geiger counters has. Voluntary networks on the internet. And that, I think, is a powerful people power response. People power response.
Now, once you have your measurement, what do you do with it? You know that there is no such thing as a safe dose of radiation. There is no safe dose of radiation. You know that radiation is being dumped into your environment willy-nilly. And you know that this is not good for you, not good for your children, not good for your future. So now, what do you do about this? What are your options? First of all, there are the personal protection options, but there's also the political policy, the social policy options. This has to stop, because we are all going to be contaminated out of existence. Gentlemen, I would like to ask Joe Jessen, who is very much aware of citizen monitoring, and Tony Piera, Dr. Tony, to talk to us about what they see our options as.
Joe, you want to go ahead?
Joe, why don't you start?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. In terms of options, I look at this as a reproducible experiment. I would really like to dig in and look at the root causes of and what isotopes are we actually seeing. And now let me just explain one thing, and it gives you a general idea of how the pros do this. Is so at the ports, for example, a port in New York and ports at LA, when the containers come through, they go through a single pass test of the gamma level. So if they note a high peak in gamma readings, what they'll do is then they'll take a look at the bill of lading on the shipping container, and then so this confirms whether this is a natural source of a gamma emitter, and if it's, for example, tabletops, if it's granite tops, what they do is they assume there's a high level of natural radiation off of granite tops. I mean, if you look at most imported granite tops, you'll see a very high ambient emitter, gamma emitter. Now, and they'll let it pass at that point. But what if they see a high gamma source coming from it, and they can't work through what they do, looking at the actual isotopes, and they'll use a calibrated scintillation detector, as I mentioned earlier, and actually look at the energy level, and they'll correlate it from the energy level back to the actual isotope. And this is all done with a calibrated instrument. So this is a way of really, then they start ratcheting up their concern when they can see that this is let's say, a primary elements to make a dirty bomb, for example. But this is a way of filtering out some of the ambient radiation with some very concerned isotopes. Then,
can we assume, Joe, that the readings that the EPA was posting on its beta site were of that quality? I suspect the readings I'm getting with my little handheld device are probably not of that quality. But can we assume that the very high readings that the EPA is getting?
No. Yeah, well, being the most transparent government ever, we know, for example, those readings are not of that quality. The example I cited was really done and limited in secret to our ports. So this is done locally in the ports when the containers come in to the ports. But the sites that you're referring to are they don't look like, I went in and looked at the notes, and they don't appear to be calibrated. They don't appear to be on an isotope level of discrimination. So, they seem like, and then of course, as Dr. Rima is going to talk about, we can't see consistency from reading to reading, from day to day, or even retroactively. So I guess my answer is no. I don't trust the government in any way, shape, or form for this.
Now, if we can assume that, just bear with me for a moment on this, if we assume that a city like Miami, Florida, where the gamma readings have been above 400, remember the EPA evacuation level is 272 or 273. If we assume that a city like Miami, which has had readings above 400 for 4 years, and those readings are steadily rising. And if you go to tinyurl.com, tinyurl.com/Fukushima fire, you'll be able to download this and see these graphs for yourself. If we assume that these are meaningful numbers, we have a city close to a nuclear reactor called Turkey Point, which has been steadily accumulating more and more gamma radiation, but which has already been clearly above the evacuation level for the entire 4 years for which we have data. So what do we do then? What do people do if they start monitoring? They have good monitors now, and they say, oh my God, we're at 416 counts per minute, and the evacuation level of the EPA is 272. What then?
Well, I mean, what I would do, I would push to have our readers support and work with us and develop an independent network that we could have some reliability and accurate readings that would be traceable and calibrated sensors. So we have something to really hang our hat on, and we could have this as a private network that would be able to look at, the two different coasts in the Midwest, let's say, 3 or 4 sampling points. And then we would have let's say every 3 months, we'd have a procedure where we would calibrate the sensors. So we would have a known accurate reading. We would have something that the government is not giving us today. Now, having said that, the government internally, of course, has all this, but it's not something that they're sharing with us.
Exactly.
We began this process a number of months ago when we created the International Commission to Study and Finalize Environmental Remediation, IC-SAFER, and Ambassador Murata, the gentleman Murata-san from Japan, who is known as the conscience of Fukushima, and Professor Busby from the European Watchdog Agency, Radiation Watchdog Agency, and our General Burt agreed to be the organizing committee. I think you're probably right, Joe. It's time to bring that whole concept forward. We've been talking about it, sending emails back and forth, and it's time to probably to actually put together that network as a really powerful first step. It's something we can do as private citizens to help alert the world to what's really happening.
You're
about
right,
4 minutes left, folks. About 4 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I want to make sure that we have a chance for Dr. Tony to give us final words along with Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to say, too, is Reuter-Stokes is a sensor company that supplies 95% of all nuclear power plants sensors. So they have the gamma, beta, and alpha sensors that's incorporated for production use. And these are calibrated every 2 to 3 months, and the data is available, but of course it's not available to the public. So what I would argue for is we would have high quality matrix so we could keep watch on what the government's trying to feed us.
Excellent. Dr. Tony.
Very excellent. Very, very important. Go ahead, Tony. Dr. Tony, tell us what your final words are.
This is quite an extremely complex and difficult problem, and that we were forced at this time to live with. Very difficult to solve. Once the Pandora box is open, it's practically impossible to put the atoms back into the genie, and they stay in the environment for a very, very, very long period of time that outlasts any one of us, outlasts our civilization, outlasts the life of the planet. Very small amounts of radiation are cancer-causing. Pretty much all ionizing radiation, only very, very small levels, are not cancer-causing, but the vast majority of radiation is cancer-causing. That includes everything: particle, photon, radiation coming from atoms, from X tubes, from X-ray tubes, from radiographies, from X-rays, from CAT scans. And the body has a limited capability to deal with healing the damage that is done into the cells and eliminate the cancer cells, less capability to deal with DNA mutations. Just the idea of what has been happening, and that it certainly includes radiation and nuclear energy. In the last, in about just a century ago, well, let's look at it the other way around. Today, the CDC in April 2010 issued a report that stroke, the good old stroke, no longer was the leading cause of death in the United States, and that radiation was now, back in 2010, radiation, cancer was the leading cause of death, and that 1 in 2 Americans were expected to die of cancer. 1 in 2. You go check it out.
Now, this is not to get cancer, this is to die of cancer.
To die of cancer. And dying of cancer, and cancer can originate from many, many sources, for many reasons. We don't know exactly, nobody really knows exactly why.
Well, there is a theory, however, and it's a theory that Dr. Rima has advanced. She calls it the genome disruption syndrome. In fact, you can learn more about that in the last few seconds, perhaps, of the show. I should say this at www.gds-therapy.com. Genome disruption syndrome. Basically, what Dr. Rima has been saying is that these neo-geoengineering technologies, nuclear power, the toxins in the vaccines and drugs, the GMO novel proteins, and all that stuff disrupts the human genome, causes the cancer and the other chronic diseases, and then there's an answer to it. And the answer is that our natural products industry for over a half century has really worked hard on creating antioxidants. And while they're not sufficient in the most extreme cases, there are lots of great nutritional approaches to supporting optimal health in a no longer optimal world. And that's a tough thing to do necessarily, but it is something that we can all pay attention to.
Absolutely. This has been...
That's just finishing the story. Today cancer is the leading cause of death, and stroke, heart problems because of obesity. It's the second one, second
Tony,
place.
we have to stop.
Wrapping up.
We're running out of time.
Wrapping up the story.
People know. I'm so sorry, but we do
100 years ago, that number was much more.
Dr. Tony, we need to stop. We're just out of time here on To Tell the Truth with Dr. Rima, and our guests have been Ralph Fusatola, JD, Joe Jessen, and Professor Tony Piera, who has an awful lot to say, as do we all. Please go to Dr. Rima Truth Reports, DRRIMA, truthreports.com. Enter your name, become part of the information flow and the solution to the problems. Please join us next month on United We Strike Radio Marathon, and you can also join us at Revolution Radio Studio B for the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. You'll find that out when you sign up for the newsletter that you will get when you enter your email address and your first name at drrimatruthreports.com. I cut Dr. Tony off. Is there a burning word that needs to be said, Ralph?
Yes, Tony, send us that as a blog. I want to publish it. I know what you were beginning to get at, and it's powerful. Please, people, there's always more information. You need to stay tuned to this information.
Brilliant stuff. I will say, Dr. Rima, thank you very much, Joe and Dr. Tony and Ralph. I'm sorry that we ran out of time there. We are obviously it's restricted the time because we have more guests to come on. But again, thank you for the information. Brilliant information as usual. This is myself, Alan James, from Open Your Mind Radio on United We Strike, June 14th, 2014. And we're going to pass over to Gary over in the States. We started off with Detlev in Switzerland. Detlev did a great job in Switzerland. Passed over to myself in Ireland. And now we're going to pass over to Gary again. Thanks, Dr. Rima, and all your guests have been on. We look forward to next month and everything that you do and everything you're exposing. Thank you very much. Just stay with us there for a minute and we'll just go to a musical break and we'll be back after this.